call them if I ever move.
If you move.
What? No, sorry, we. If we move, okay? Kill me because I said I instead of we. Yeah, you know why I said that? Because subliminally, that means that I hate you, which, ow! There's a magnet in the thing.
I just don't know why this is all so hard.
What?
This, everything. Marriage, it's supposed to be different than this.
Says who?
Everyone.
Well, they're wrong. It's just like this. It's exactly like this.
According to who?
Everybody. I asked around. Look, there's always gonna be stuff, you know. But that's I put up with your crap, and you put up with my crap.
That's marriage?
This is what I'm thinking.
Great.
Look, all I know is that if we keep this up, we're gonna die. Because I'm either gonna burst into flames or I'm gonna strangle you. And I really don't want to do either one.
What do you want?
I just want to be married to you.
What if this lasagna sucks?
What if it doesn't?
What if they've come... More.
Come here.
Well, good morning. We're in the last week of our series, Bad Relationship Advice, and we've talked about some kind of heavy things the last couple of weeks, and so we thought that this week would be a good week to conclude with talking specifically about marriage. And I realize not everybody is married, but hopefully a lot of what we talk about today will also apply to whatever relationships you find yourself in. But specifically, we want to take a little bit of a deep dive this week into how we can have better marriages. So if you've been following along the last couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago we talked about sex. Last week we talked about divorce and remarriage, so some heavy topics. I thought maybe a roadmap of today would be helpful. So today, this is what we'll talk about. We'll just talk about attraction, submission, affairs, Luka Doncic, having a strong shoe game, Shaquille O'Neal, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and then we'll be done. We good? Great. All right. So here's the first thing I want to just mention. First of all, similarity is not the basis for attraction. This is what we have found, like lots of studies have shown this. We actually have a really tough time predicting who will be attracted to who. It's really challenging to predict that. We really can't do it. We have no model that works for that efficiently, effectively, on a regular basis. What we do see, though, over and over, the data bears this out, is that the people who end up being attracted to each other oftentimes are very dissimilar from one another. They have a lot of differences. My wife and I have been married for a while now. I remember dating. I still remember, like, I just enjoyed so much about her, and it wasn't because we were the same, it was because we were different, right? She, for instance, is very temperature sensitive. We grew up in East Texas. Shortly after we got married, we moved to Chicago, and I just remember I was working in the office one morning. I was like doing Greek homework, and I heard her from the living room. She was getting ready to go to one of her classes, and I just heard from the living room her go, and I thought, obviously, an axe murderer was trying to get in the door. I ran around. Turns out she was putting on her snow boots, and she was like, I'm so tired of the cold. I just can't stand anymore. I can't do it. Anyway, so we live in Southern California now. So it was right away, like I could just tell there were major differences. Oh, the other thing, she has got like a really fast metabolism. She can eat basically whatever she wants, and she stays thin, and I have to work really hard just to maintain whatever shape this is, okay? Like, so that doesn't seem fair to me, but that's been the reality. And so, and even our food differences are very different. I enjoy salads, and I enjoy vegetables. I enjoy those things. She doesn't really enjoy much healthy food. Like most vegetables, she's not a fan of. She never gets salad ever. So we'll be in a restaurant, and this was, I mean, first year of marriage, this became really obvious. We'll be in a restaurant, and we'll order our meals, and the server will say something like, "Oh, would you like something to start your meal with?" And I'll say, "Yes, please. I would take the baby carrot and organic tomato salad, please." You know. And then we go to her, and she'd be like, "And I'll take the bacon cheese fries drizzled with duck fat, please." "Oh, yes, ma'am. Would you like some ketchup on the side?" "No, but if you could just bring me like a little bit of lard for me to dip it in, that would be great." And then every time what happens is they bring it out, and they always put the salad down in front of her, and they put whatever horrible things she ordered down in front of me, and then I have to look at them and say, "Actually, no, you got this wrong. That's supposed to be mine." And then they look at me like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yes." So there were all these differences, but then there were like some major differences as well, especially when we first got married. When I was in my 20s, if I felt betrayed by someone, or if I felt like someone just did like a horribly wrong thing or lied to me, especially if someone lied to me, like I would have a tendency to write people off. And this one encounter I had with them, for me, would really color the whole way I thought about them. What Emily has always been so much better than I am at is is putting herself in somebody else's shoes and really empathizing with someone else and asking what would their motivation be, or what would it be like if you were them. And so I remember early on, like her being able to say, like, well, look, I know that he didn't do well here, he didn't treat you well here, but he's a good dad, and he seems to help in the community, and she would try to give me that alternative viewpoint. And when I was younger, obviously my response to that would be, shut up, I don't want to hear that, right? But as we got older, I saw like the wisdom and trying to see it from someone else's perspective. Like, similarity is not the basis for attraction. Many of our good friends, and I'm sure this has been your experience as well, because the statistics bear it out, you don't marry someone who's just like you usually. You marry someone who's different from you. Which means we always have to be trying to create space for the other person in our marriage because of those differences. For instance, I tend to be fairly outgoing and fairly assertive, and my wife is, she's not a total introvert, but she's also not an extrovert, and she's not as assertive. She's not naturally going to defend herself or speak up for herself. And I figured out after just a few months of marriage that if I wanted to bowl her over, run her over in the conversation, I could do that. But that wasn't helpful, and it wasn't healthy, and it didn't allow me to actually listen to her perspective or take in what she was trying to say. And I had to learn early on, like, if we were going to have a good marriage, that was going to have to include me shutting my mouth sometimes and just waiting and letting her have her say. I had to do that. And she had to forgive me a lot for overstepping my boundaries. We do that for each other, right? So similarity is not the basis for attraction. We're oftentimes attracted to people who are different than us. But here's the fascinating thing. Dr. John Gottman, who we'll talk more about later in this message, Dr. John Gottman says this: once we're married, we try to turn this different person into us. So we're attracted to someone because they're not us, and then once we're married, we try to turn them into us. This is, by the way, the reason for a lot of tension that we see in marriages. Like, someone didn't think about it the way that we thought about it. Someone didn't do it the way we would have done it. Someone's idea of marriage wasn't what our idea of marriage was. And then we start to try and persuade them or control them or convince them to see it our way, do it our way, think about it our way. And so much of marital tension ends up being wrapped up in that. So today, recognizing that this is the case, we're going to look at the book of Ephesians. It's a passage from the Apostle Paul, one of the very first Christians, him instructing husbands and wives how it is that they should live with one another. And then we're just going to explore what we've found through psychology and sociology over the last several decades as to how we can do that even better. So Ephesians chapter 5, if you want to follow along in your Bible, we're going to start with verse number 22. And this is what Paul writes. He says this. Now, hang with me through this passage, okay? If this makes you uncomfortable, we'll make it better in a second. Just hang with me. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Amen, fellas? Okay, see, so this always happens. Anytime we read this passage, I look across the room and I got two very different looks depending on who you are, okay? I get it. What's really important is that you understand that what we just read is not actually the beginning of this section of Scripture. This section of Scripture starts in verse 21, and that verse says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's the starting place. Everything that comes after it, wives submitting to your husbands, husbands loving your wives, like everything that comes after it is grounded in this statement. You see, in the first century, it's an incredibly patriarchal society. So the one that Paul is writing to, everyone would assume that wives ought to submit to their husbands, of course. In the first century, the husband is the head of the household, the king of the castle. Like, the wife has to basically obey what the husband says, and so do the children, and so do the servants if they have servants. Like, that's both how it worked in the Jewish culture, and it's how it worked in the Roman culture. So as Paul's writing this, like, anyone who would read it wouldn't bat an eye. This wouldn't feel oppressive. This wouldn't feel misogynistic. This wouldn't feel patriarchal. That was just the air that they breathed. Of course, wives would submit to husbands. That's how you keep an orderly household. But he starts this off, submit to one another. And it's only in this grounding that you submit to one another that he then says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. It's in the verses that follow this section, though, that Paul starts to really push back against cultural expectations. So starting in verse number 25, he writes this: husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy. Christ loved the church so much that he gave his life for the church. Submit to one another. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, submit to your wife to such a degree that you are willing to give your life for her, just as Christ gave his life for you. Okay, see, now we're into something radically different than what would have matched the first century expectation. He gave himself up for the church to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. And he goes on to say this: in this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Submit to one another. Wives, the way you'll submit to, the way you'll do this, right? The way that you'll enter into submission is to submit to your husband. Submit to what he has to say. Husbands, the way that you'll do this is even more drastic. Love your wives so much that you're willing to give your life for them. And if this sounds really unappealing, maybe marriage isn't for you. That's what he's inviting us into. In fact, he's inviting us into what Andy Stanley has called a submission competition. Right? How can we each submit to one another's needs, make space for one another, carve that out enough to such a degree that we are helpful? It's another way really of asking the question that we asked last week numbers of times, which is simply like, what does love require? Like, if we're going to follow after Jesus, what does love require? Now, what I want to spend kind of the rest of our time on this morning then, with this as our basis and our background, is some of the challenges that come up as we try and live this out, because it is challenging. And the first subject I want to talk about is something that, usually when you give a message or a talk, what you want to do is have one main point and everything's kind of moving toward that main point. I'm going to talk about something for a few minutes here that's related, but it's a little bit of a side note. I just felt like it was really important to talk about today. So it's been on my heart for a few months now, so bear with me. I know for some of you it'll be painful to talk about this. For others of you, you really need to hear this today, and I'll get to all that in just a moment. I want to talk for just a few minutes this morning about extramarital affairs. Because the truth is, I don't have to tell you, don't have an extramarital affair. Okay, good. We all on the same page now? Because you probably didn't know that before, and so now that you've heard it, you won't do it. That's not how that goes, right? The problem isn't that people don't know that they shouldn't have affairs, or that affairs are painful, or that they end up leaving all kinds of wreckage in their wake. People do know that stuff, and they have them anyway. In fact, just in the last 18 months, a couple of pastors that I know personally, one of whom I never, ever, ever would have expected it to happen to him, have had extramarital affairs. I assure you, they knew that wasn't right, that wasn't in keeping in line with Jesus' teaching, and they knew that affairs are messy. They have themselves counseled people who have been through affairs. They know that it's bad, so why? Why do we do it? So I just want to give us, there can be lots of reasons. I want to just talk about a couple of reasons why we get pulled into having extramarital affairs this morning, and then how it is that we might be able to guard our heart so that it doesn't happen to us and we don't experience the kind of pain that these can bring about. Okay, a couple things about affairs. First of all, we want what we can't have. Just generally speaking, that's all of us. We want what we can't have. If we can't have something, we want it even more. Okay, it's enticing to us. And, from an evolutionary perspective, this was handy when we were trying to figure out, how to kill animals in order to, eat and have food and stuff like that. It's I can't have it right now. How can I invent a way to have it, right? How can I become a better hunter? How can I become better at this? How can I become more? It's been one of the reasons that we have all these technological advances. I can't do X, Y, or Z. What can I build? What could we invent? What could we put in place to do X, Y, or Z? This desire that we have for things that we can't quite grasp now has in many ways been very helpful for us. But sometimes the thing we can't grasp is the thing we shouldn't grasp. And when that's the case, it can become very damaging. Two basketball teams that I'm a huge fan of, longtime fan of. I want to talk about both of them in weird and different ways this morning. One of them is the Dallas Mavericks. I grew up close to Dallas, and the other is the Los Angeles Lakers. I was a big Magic Johnson fan, Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant. I was a big fan of all of them. And then, and now we live here, and we get to cheer for them close by, which is really cool. My favorite basketball player in the world right now, who's currently playing, is Luka Doncic. He got drafted by the Dallas Mavericks a few years ago. That just fell in our lap. Honestly, we did nothing to deserve it. I assume God just loves the Mavericks, and so he blessed them with Luka. Thank you, Lord. All right, so if you're not familiar with Luka Doncic, you probably will be fairly soon. He's probably going to win the MVP here in the next couple of years. I mean, he's an incredible player. In fact, last year the Dallas Mavericks played the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs, and the Phoenix Suns had the best record in the Western Conference. Everybody thought that the Phoenix Suns would definitely win that matchup, and then the Mavs took them all the way to Game 7, but Game 7 was going to be in Phoenix, and they hadn't really been able to win there, and so everyone thought, oh, the Mavericks are going to get killed. And Luka, right, all the Phoenix Suns were just just running their mouths in the press. And Lucas said something like, everyone talks tough when they're up, right? That was what he said. Then he went to the game, and in the first half, Lucas scored as many points as the entire Phoenix Suns team. It was like the third greatest day of my life. So this was a picture from the third quarter. It's just great. All right, so they were up 70-31 at that point. They blew them out. This was just a delightful evening. My boys would come in sometimes because they would just hear me laughing. What's wrong, Dad? Everything's right. Nothing in the whole world is wrong right now, right? Anyway, so Luka ended up signing a contract with Jordan brand, right? Air Jordan brand sneakers, and they ended up creating the Luka 1 is what it was called. And so it looks like this. And then they kind of like advertised this in a few places online, and I was like, that's a pretty sweet looking shoe. I would like to have that shoe now. This is a great colorway for it. And then I read online that they released it. I was like, great, what does it cost? That's the question, right? Well, it was only $110, which for a basketball shoe is really not that bad. But then when I went to go try to order it, I realized they had only released it in Europe and they hadn't released it in the United States. Shame, Nike, shame. So I was like, well, I can go to eBay or I can go to the stock exchange. I can see like maybe it's somewhere else. So it turns out I could order them, and I'd have to buy them from someone who bought them in Europe and resold them online, and now the price was $445. And then I really wanted them. Here's the problem. I decided not to order them because it turns out, as much as I like this shoe, I like being married to my wife more. But it's like, it's that thing that you want, and then when you find out, like, oh no, it's even farther out of reach than you thought, or it's even more expensive, you're like, oh, well, now I really want it. That doesn't make me want a little less. I wanted more. What is that? It's inherent, it's built in. We want what we can't have. There is something about an affair that's enticing to us. It's thrilling, it's exciting, because it's that forbidden thing I'm not supposed to have it. It should just be out of grasp, and that's why I want to take hold of it all the more. You just need to know that about yourself. That's in you. You have something of that in you, and it can be helpful in some cases and highly detrimental in others. Know that. Another reason we have affairs is very simple. We want to be wanted. We want someone to desire us. And I don't just mean sexually, I mean holistically. We want to be wanted, and especially if you're in a marriage where you're having issues, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, where you're having issues and you don't feel wanted, you don't feel desired, someone else takes some interest in you, and it can totally light you up. And you can open yourself up to an extramarital affair. Now, listen. I am sure that this is a painful topic for a number of people within the sound of my voice, because people we have in here and online, some couple is sitting there, they have walked through the challenges of one of them having an extramarital affair and having to pick up the broken pieces and try and move forward. And lots of marriages where this happens, by the way, do not make it. Lots of them don't make it. And very rarely, by the way, does the person who had the extramarital affair actually end up marrying the lover that they ended up having the affair with. That only happens about 3% of the women that men have an affair with do they get married to, and then 75% of those marriages fail. So this is not, an affair is almost never a good long-term life situation or happening or solution for anybody. So if you've walked through that already, I am so sorry that you've walked through it, but that means you probably know better than anyone how important it is for us to talk about this and take this really seriously. So just a couple of things I want to say about how to guard your heart then around this, okay? Because we want what we can't have and because we want to be wanted, whenever a pathway that could lead to an affair opens up, it is best to just shut that down as quickly as possible. Let me give you an example from my own life. A few years ago, I had someone in my congregation. It was a different church in a different state all the way across the country. I had someone from my congregation who sent me an email. It was a married woman, an attractive married woman, and she said in the email, very encouraging and kind things to me, and then she ended in the last paragraph of the email by telling me how attracted she was to me. So what do? It feels, acknowledgement, an admission. It feels good for someone to tell you that they're attracted to you, or for someone to tell you that they like a thing that you're doing. So what do? I could send a flirty email back. I could not answer at all, or I could do what I did, which is to shut that down immediately. I immediately forwarded it to the board chair of my board there at the church. I sent it to every person on my executive leadership team. And then I didn't email it to her. I came home to my wife that night and showed her and let her read. Don't email that to your wife in the middle of the day with no context, okay? I came home that night, I showed it to her, and she said, what the heck? And I said, yeah, that's what we're talking about. So I told her, this is what I've already done. Let's talk about it. This is who the woman is. You got to shut it down immediately. I did not get that email and think to myself, oh my goodness, I'm going to have an affair now. That's not what I thought. But if you don't shut it down there, you actually don't know where it will lead. And because we naturally want what we can't have, and because we want to be wanted, leaving that pathway open may take you to places you never intended for it to. And these days, let's just name it, these days, there are so many ways that people can start with flirting and back and forth and end up in a place they never expected to, right? There's direct messages through Instagram, and there's Snapchat, and there's all kinds of online messaging services that can be outside of your text messaging. There's all kinds of ways to hide stuff. And we can fool ourselves, deceive ourselves into thinking that nobody will ever know, nobody will ever find out, and it's not hurting anybody that much. And it's just a little bit of flirting, and then eventually we find ourselves in a place we never would have thought we would be. And let me just tell you, as a pastor who's counseled dozens and dozens of couples who have gone through extramarital affairs over the years, it's not worth it. It's never worth it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I listened to an interview this last week. It was a podcast, actually, with Shaquille O'Neal. You probably remember Shaquille O'Neal. So, and Shaq was talking about the fact that he had extramarital affairs when he was playing in the NBA. And he said this, I was a serial cheater. I did it. I was the best at it, and I'm not proud of it. By the way, has there ever been a more Shaquille O'Neal quote in the world than someone saying, I cheated and I was the best at it? That's the most Shaq thing ever. Okay, so I was a serial cheater. I did it. I was the best at it, and I'm not proud of it. And he went on to say this. I lost my family doing it. I lost valuable, important years with my children from doing it. In fact, here's what he said. He said, in all of his years of playing basketball, he said, more than the crowds, more than the stats, more than the recognition, even more than the championships, which if you've ever heard Shaquille O'Neal talk about championships, you know is a really big deal. The things that were, he said, the best days of my life were coming home and hearing my 6 children yell, Daddy, 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 and come up to me and give him hugs, and so happy that they were home. He said, they didn't care that I missed 15 free throws that night. Yeah, Shaq, you did do that, didn't you? You missed 15 free throws sometimes. Anyway, they didn't care about that. They were just happy that Daddy was home. And then what happened? His wife found out that he had multiple affairs. She left him. She took the kids. He said the loneliest he has ever been was sitting in a 70,000 square foot mansion in Orlando, Florida that he had built. He had built playrooms and basketball courts and water slides so that the kids could hang out, so they could bring all their friends over, so they could be the hub. He said the loneliest he's ever been is sitting by himself in a 70,000 square foot mansion in Orlando, Florida, because he cheated. He had an affair. He lost years with his kids, had to rebuild that relationship. And so he ended the interview by saying, you asked me if it was worth it? No, it is not worth it. Now, most of us don't have, I'm sure it's hard to judge very famous people, right? I know that they get all kinds of temptation that most of us will not ever have, and to that magnitude. And yet, for each of us, it can be really challenging to just shut the door early to make sure that the affair doesn't happen. I'm urging you to recognize that it's not worth it. It's never worth it. It's not worth it. And it leaves a trail, a wreckage that you cannot imagine if you haven't been through it before. In fact, psychologist Jordan Peterson, he's a bit of a lightning rod for on some issues, but he said this a few months ago in an interview, and I thought it was helpful. He said this, in all my years of clinical practice, he's a psychologist, of all my years of clinical practice, I've never ever seen anyone ever get away with anything even once. You think the chickens won't come home to roost? All that means is that you're too stupid or blind or self-deceptive to see what your lies caused. Look, here's the thing. Almost everyone who has an affair knows that it wasn't the right thing to do. They learned that a long time ago. They knew it was wrong when they were doing it. It's not a matter of knowledge. That's not the problem. The problem is you get carried away and you don't count the cost. And I'm urging you this morning to count the cost. Because here's the truth. you can have an affair at any point you choose. At any point you choose, you could pull the trigger, you could choose to do that. You can never go back to the way things were before. And that doesn't mean the marriage can't survive. And it doesn't mean that with healing and work and trust building that it can't even thrive. But it'll never be the marriage you had before. Brene Brown is a shame researcher, which means she's super fun at parties. And she studies the difference between guilt, which is I did something bad, versus shame, I am something bad, right? Those major differences in how people live with feeling shameful about who they are. And one of the things that I've heard her mention before, which has been very helpful for me, is she said, once an affair has happened within a marriage, the first step toward healing is that both of you have to grieve the marriage that was, because it will never be that again. It can still be good. It may even be great, but it'll never be what it once was, because you will have to find a new way forward and build a new thing to go forward with. So listen, you can have an affair anytime you want. You can pull the trigger anytime on that. You can never go back to the way things were before. Count the cost before you do something like that. Okay, that was an aside. It wasn't a main point, but I've just seen too many people make the mistake, not count the cost, or think that they would get away with it or not get caught or whatever, and it tears them into, like emotionally, it tears them into morally, it fractures the relationship with their spouse, with their family, with the person that they had the affair with. There's often lots of fallout there. It oftentimes leads to divorce, which just costs a ton of money and time and emotion. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. It's not worth it. Okay, we'll move on. I want to talk this morning, I want to conclude just by talking about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and some antidotes. John Gottman is a marriage researcher that I talked about in the very first week. And if you are having trouble with your marriage, right, there are ways that we can be helpful here at Inland Hills Church. We can either let you have a list of counselors, or we can meet with you once and kind of help you maybe put some issues out on the table. But if you need a baby step before you even do something like that, going to John Gottman, the Gottman Institute's website would be very helpful. What I told you in week 1 is that the Gottman Institute has gotten so good at studying marriages that work versus marriages that don't work, that they can listen to about a 15-minute long argument between a couple and determine with 96% accuracy whether they'll get a divorce or not. I mean, that's how good they are, okay? So the Gottman Institute, their website has a lot of resources available to you. Check it out if you haven't. There's even some assessments that you can take to see how healthy a couple that you are. But what I wanted to bring up today was what he calls the 4 horsemen of the marriage apocalypse. These 4 things, if they're in a marriage, if they're really in a relationship, are signs, evidence that this relationship is headed toward a split, toward a divorce, toward the end. So I want to talk about what the 4 are, and then give an antidote for each, and then we'll be done. Here's the first one. The first sign is criticism. Criticism. Now, criticism isn't just saying hey, you could have done that a little bit better. Criticism is saying not only did you do something wrong, but you're wrong because of it, right? It's got shame mixed in with it. It's saying, it's more something like this. I came home today and all of your stuff was all over the counter. You never pick your stuff up off the counter because you always only think about yourself and you don't think about others. Which sounds a lot more harsh than, hey, would you mind moving your stuff, please? You see the difference? There's a major difference there. One is saying not only did you mess up, but you are a mess up. That's who you are. There's something wrong with you. One is asking to join me in solving a problem that needs to be solved. They're very, very different. So when criticism starts to take place often in a relationship, it can start to fracture it. The next one is even more harsh. It can be confused with criticism, but it's way beyond criticism, and it's what we would call contempt. This isn't just saying there's something wrong with you. It's also saying I am personally morally superior to you, so that not only there's just something wrong with you, but there's all kinds of things right with me, and therefore this is not working out. I'll give you an example of this. This would be like if you came home from work one day, you saw your spouse, and you said hi, and then you laid down on the couch for a second. You said, "Man, I'm just feeling really tired," and your spouse answered, "You're tired? You're tired? I've been chasing kids all around this house all day today. I had to cook things for the family that's coming over to join us for dinner tonight. I had to file our taxes this morning," which you never even think about because I have to do it all the time. And then every day you get home from work, you're like, "I'm tired. I'm so sleepy. I had a hard day at work. They forgot to put the right toppings on my lunch today." And you just come in and you lay down on the couch. Here's the problem with you. I don't need another child to take care of tonight. Get your butt up and help me. That's contempt, okay? That's an extreme version of contempt. But I got to tell you, it felt good to get that off my chest. So that's saying, right? Like, not only is there something wrong with you, but I'm in the right, you're in the wrong. I'm morally superior, you are morally inferior. When you start talking to each other like that, whether you're screaming or not, you don't have to scream. It doesn't have to be a shout for it to hurt, for it to cut really deep, for you to constantly be putting yourself above your spouse. This is the most dangerous of the 4 horsemen of the marriage apocalypse, because once the marriage gets to this point, the marriage ceases to be enjoyable. Can you imagine, whether it's one or both of you, talking to each other like that all the time? Would you even want to hang out, just the two of you? No! You want alone time. I just need a minute. I just need a minute, right? That's what you need if it gets to this place. So when you can't enjoy one another anymore, like why would you stay in the relationship? And sure enough, most people who get to contempt and stay in contempt end the relationship. Of course they do. Of course they do. Criticism, contempt, the third one, defensiveness. Defensiveness, right? Now listen, all of us have a hard time taking constructive criticism sometimes. I get that. Like, you can feel like we are our own best lawyers. You know, we will figure out a way to justify the thing that we did. We have that naturally within us, whether we get paid as a lawyer or not. We'll just do it for free. We do pro bono work for ourselves. That's how that works, okay? And so because that's who we are, it's hard to take feedback from somebody else, especially that puts us in a bad light. Defensiveness gets really bad when we start to not only refuse to take responsibility ourselves, but start to turn it around on somebody else, right? Using the example earlier with the stuff all over the counter, would be like, hey, it really bothered me that all this stuff was on the counter when I got home. In the future, can you please clean that up? Like, let's say that maybe is what someone approached you with, and then you said, that stuff on the counter, look, if it was bothering you so much, why didn't you clean it up? You're the one who left a mess. If it was bothering you, I was fine with it, right? You're defensive, you're not gonna take ownership, and you try to turn it around. Really, you think I'm the problem, you're the problem, right? That's where defensiveness goes. And that's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The last one, stonewalling. Stonewalling often happens when you're in a relationship that has contempt already, right? So there's a moral superiority, and at some point within the argument, you just shut down. You may be physically present, but we are not going to engage in this conversation together. That's stonewalling. And it often happens because you've had like a fight, flight, or freeze response inside your head, and you can't go forward. You can't go forward. So what do we do about these 4? Because if some or all 4 of these are prevalent within our marriage, then we may be headed toward a really bad time. Probably we're fairly unhappy already, and we may be headed toward divorce. Well, the Gottman Society has also discovered, the Gottman Institute has discovered that there are also 4 antidotes. There's an antidote for each one of these, so we'll talk about those real fast. So for criticism, if criticism is something that happens in your marriage right now, you need to begin with a gentle startup. Okay? So you can still talk to each other about how the other one can be more helpful, but you need to begin with a gentle startup. So instead of like, hey, stop leaving your big stinky shoes in the middle of the floor every night, right? That doesn't feel great. Yeah, I know. I need to, move the shoes across, and my feet probably need to be washed more often, but still, it doesn't feel good to hear that, right? What's the gentle startup? The gentle startup is like, hey, I've noticed the last few nights when you come home, you're leaving your shoes in the middle of the floor, and like the kids have tripped on it, and the dog tripped on it, and I almost tripped on it, and they don't smell great. Like, could you maybe leave them by the door when you come in at night? Just, it's a gentle, you're working your way into it, right? You're working your way into it. My wife is really good about doing this for me. I'm really grateful for it. When I was a kid, when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, I might be playing Nintendo right before bed, or Sega, and my parents would say like, hey, you need to come downstairs and go to bed. And I would say, okay, Mom, be right there, just a minute. And I would mean it when I said it. Like, it was a sincere thing I would say. But then, Super Mario it was a little ways. I had to jump on the flag and get all the way down the pole and in the castle. And then the next level started right away. And I would just forget what I said. I'm just going to keep doing it. And, my mom would remind me again. And, okay, I'll come downstairs. So it turns out, now that I'm 40, I'm no better. I'm no better than I was when I was that age. If I'm working on an email, or I'm reading a book or something, and Emily says, like, hey, can you come upstairs and help me with the kids? I'll say, just a minute. And I mean it when I say it. And then I get really engrossed in the thing, and I totally forget about it. She could be really annoyed by that. And maybe, I see you right there. Maybe you are. I don't know. Just maybe cover your face for a second. She could be really annoyed by that. But she's really great at the gentle startup. A few minutes will go by and she'll say something like, hey, Josh, you remember a few minutes ago when you said you'd be right there? I'm like, oh, yep. So then I get up and go, right? But that's way better than, hey, you lazy loser, get up here now, right? That wouldn't feel so good. But imagine there's a spectrum, right? Between like, hey, and like, rah, right? There's a spectrum. But choose like to lean more this way. That's the gentle startup. It's like, how can I bring your attention to something without making you feel so defensive right away that we can't even have a constructive conversation about it, right? So the gentle startup is really helpful for that. So that's criticism. Contempt, appreciation. Appreciation is the remedy, it's the antidote for contempt. And listen, sometimes we're married long enough, we have a hard time remembering what we appreciated about the person we got married to. So if that's you, if you're struggling with that, maybe lower the bar a little, okay? Like maybe make it to where they don't have to cure cancer to get appreciation from me, okay? There's other things they can do. And it can be, and then tell them. So it's not just something to do in your own mind. It's something to name for yourself and then to name to them and be really specific about it. So don't just say like, I think you're pretty, which is great to hear, but tell them what you like. You like their hair? You think they have a great smile? Is it the caboose? What is it that makes you happy to be married to this person? Yeah, that's right. We went there. All right. So you tell them whatever. First hour I didn't even get that. You're so welcome. So like, you be specific. You know, you're married to this person. What is it that you appreciate about them, right? And it can be beyond that. For instance, I love my wife's laugh. Like, she doesn't belly laugh that often, but when she does, it's like the greatest day that month. It's just gonna be like, I can live with that for so long. I've got a few little video clips, actually, of her laughing. I don't think she knows this. Of her laughing saved to my iPhone, and sometimes I watch them when I'm in a bad mood because her laugh is so awesome. I just love it. Whenever I can get that kind of belly laugh out of her, that feels like a mission accomplished moment for me. I just love that so much. What do you appreciate about your spouse? Can you think it to yourself? Can you tell them specifically? Hey, I really appreciated the way that you got the kids all tucked in when I had that Zoom call that I had to get on. Thank you for doing that. Like that was a load off for me tonight. Whatever it can be. I appreciate it when you did this. I appreciate when you said that. I appreciate how beautiful you look tonight, how handsome you look tonight. Like whatever it is, it's the appreciation and the stating of it that starts to ward off the contempt. Because we start to realize that our partner sees us for more than just our faults. It's really important. Okay, third one, defensiveness. This is not going to be that hard. Take responsibility. When you mess up, own it. For instance, this is not the microphone I was supposed to use for this service. I lost the other one. It's in this room somewhere. If you find it, if you could give it to me after the service, that'd be great, okay? Thanks, tech team, for doing a real quick 180 on that. I appreciate it. Take responsibility when you mess up. We all make mistakes. Everybody does. I know these days, by the way, it's very popular for politicians to never, ever, ever admit they were wrong and never apologize. And maybe that'll get you elected, but it won't keep you married. Take responsibility when you mess up. Probably a couple years ago now, I just remember I had a night where I was just really short with my boys and I was really short with Emily. I had not gotten enough sleep that week and I just wasn't helpful. Several times I was more annoyed by far than normal. And I just remember I helped tuck the kids in that night and it was gnawing at me because I knew, like I wasn't proud of the way I had behaved that night. I wasn't proud of the way I had treated them, right? And I wasn't like off the rails, like yelling or anything. It just wasn't a great moment for me. And instead, she would have probably, because she's great at this, she would have probably mentioned it in a very kind way later that night or the next day. But I just thought, you know what? I don't like the way that just went down, and it's nobody's fault but mine. And I just remember saying to her, like, hey, I'm really sorry for the way I behaved tonight. That wasn't okay. That's not who I want to be. And like, her receiving of that was so like, you could tell like it was a load off her shoulders because she doesn't have to bring it up now. She was thankful that I recognized it before she had to say anything. And it just helped repair the relationship quickly. And it allowed me to not have to feel defensive later. Like if we take responsibility for our mistakes, if we both commit to doing that, that's part of mutual submission that Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 5. And then finally, stonewalling. Stonewalling. Take a time out. All right, here's what they found, the Gottman Institute. This is so fascinating to me. They would monitor couples as they were having discussions and fights. And as the couple was arguing with each other, they did this experiment where after 15 minutes of arguing, they would tell the couples that there was something wrong, malfunctioning with the recording equipment because some idiot lost the microphone or something, and they needed to take a break while they fixed it. And they said, like, hey, can you each go to separate rooms and just read a magazine while we fix this? And they had them do that for 30 minutes. What they found is that when the couple came back, they were able to have that argument with much better clarity and logic and kindness toward one another because of the timeout. So what happens is when we get emotional about something or when we get into it with somebody, there's a fight, flight, or freeze response that starts to hit us, and we put our dukes up and we start to go. And it does not make for a helpful conversation. Almost never. So what these researchers discovered is take a timeout. Now here's the challenge, right? We have all different kinds of personality types. And some of us are super conflict avoidant. We don't want to have a hard conversation that's going to be uncomfortable with somebody. And some of us are just flat out conflict loving. It's yeah, we want to fight. Let's get in there. Let's do it. I will destroy you, right? And there's a spectrum between that, but we have those two types of people. If you are one of those people that tends to embrace conflict, I want to fight it out right now. I want to get it over with. Do not think that taking a time out is an excuse to just not have the conversation or an ejection or running away from it. You just sometimes need a break. That helps, honestly, it helps your, metaphysically, physically, internally, your chemicals will start to level out. Your brain chemicals will start to level out, and you can come back and have a much more logical, less emotional conversation. Do that sometimes. One of you, if you're having a disagreement or argument, sometimes one of you just may, hey, I need a timeout. Can we come back to this in 30 minutes? Can we come back to this in 45 minutes? And then go do something else for 30 minutes that doesn't involve thinking about this, right? Go watch Netflix or read a magazine or hang out with the kid or do a puzzle, do something. What you don't need to do is start going in the other room and planning your litigation attack when you come back, okay? Yeah, and then I'll say that, and she'll be like, what? And I'll be like, oh, you know what you did. And then she'll be like, I don't know. And I'll be like, yeah. Yeah. Don't do that. The goal is not to game plan. The goal is to calm down, okay? Because otherwise, you may get to a place where you're just stonewalling each other. We're just not going to actually talk about it because talking about it would be hard. And if all of this is too hard to remember, maybe just remember the wise words of the philosopher Paul Reiser. I put up with your crap, and you put up with my crap. That's marriage. This is what I'm thinking. Paul ends this section of Ephesians by saying this. As the scriptures say, and he's quoting from the Old Testament, they would have been very familiar with this passage. A man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. That would be one of the ways that they thought about marriage. He goes on to say this is a great mystery, but is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. In other words, a great marriage, a beautiful marriage, is an illustration. It's a signpost. It's a symbol. It's a picture of what Jesus does for us. A great marriage, just as Jesus, right, was willing to forsake heaven and forsake being in the presence of the Father and the Spirit, just as Jesus was willing to do that and come here. So a man leaves his father and his mother and unites with his wife. And just as Jesus becomes one with the church, so the husband and the wife become one with one another. That's marriage. That's the beauty. So Paul concludes by saying this. So I say again, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Love and respect, mutual submission, a submission competition. What does love require? Your marriage can be a picture of God's love for the world, but not unless we work on it, and not unless we're working toward God at the same time that we're working on our marriage. I'm rooting for you. I want your marriage to shine like the stars in the sky. I want it for you, but I want it for the world around you as well. May your marriage be a blessing. And for those of you who are not married, please understand that these kinds of relational dynamics are at play in every relationship that we have. And that in every relationship we have the opportunity to show the love, the grace, the mercy, the kindness of Jesus. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for our time together today. Lord, for every person with the sound of my voice who's married, I just want to pray for their marriages. I pray that if they need to have the hard conversation where they sit down and hey, these are the 4 signs that we're headed toward this health. What are the ones that we're struggling with, God? Would you give them clarity and the ability to talk about that this week, Lord? May they be able to have honest, open, candid conversations about it. And Lord, may their marriages continue to get better and better so that we have a better and better picture of what it is that Jesus did for us. And Lord, for those of us who are not married and who are maybe just maybe we're in relationships, maybe we have friendships, coworkers, family members, Lord, would you allow us to see that many of the same dynamics are at work in those, God? And may we shine like the stars in the sky individually as well as we share the love, the grace, the mercy of Christ with all of those around us. It's in Jesus' name we ask these things. Amen.